a client in the East Bay that we've been working with a little bit on a development of a vacant parcel. He's got about 10 acres of vacant land that he's trying to develop. So he got a proposal from another company in the Bay Area for a $10,000 land development checklist, which we thought was a little bit humorous. It's really not. It's really not humorous. It's astounding. Anyways, I wanted to share that little story with you guys because I think it provides some really excellent lessons for people that are involved in land development and helps people understand why it's really important to choose the right consultant, and why I really think if you're going to be doing land development in California, you should really be working with a good land surveyor. I don't know that choosing an architect or a civil engineer as your primary point of contact on a land development project is always a great idea. Certainly, a lot of land development projects need a good design team, but they usually come in a little later in the process, and if you're not careful, you can really pay a lot of money for the design team to work on some land entitlement, land planning issues that they may not be qualified to deal with. So, and this is a good example of that. That's why I wanted to talk about it. So, this client was referred to us by one of the land attorneys we work with, and he wanted to evaluate some options on this property he has. See what his options are, his alternatives are to develop the land. And so we did some basic research. We pulled his land records and got an idea what it would take to put his boundary on the ground. The boundary of this, actually 2 parcels, adjacent parcels, and put together some costs for him. And then he gave him a proposal to meet with the city, talk about what they'd like to see on the property, review the zoning, look at the flood zone information, work with an appraiser, do some valuation of the properties, both vacant, as paper lots in a subdivision and fully developed, do some conceptual design sketches, work with some folks to put together some preliminary construction estimates. And so we gave him a proposal to do that. And he also wanted some pricing for a lot line adjustment with the neighbors, so we did that. And we didn't hear from him for a while. And so we called him back and said, "Hey, we haven't heard from you. We're just curious what happened." He said, "Well, I decided I'm not going to do the lot line adjustment, and I don't need the alternative analysis. I'm going to do a minor subdivision. I'm going to go ahead and split these into paper lots for now." He said, "I may develop them down the road, but right now I just want to get the paper subdivision done." He said, "Could you give me a proposal for that?" And we said, "Sure, we'll work something up." So we started working on the proposal. Well, in the meantime, the attorney that referred him called me up. He's a good client of ours, the attorney, and he said, "Hey," he says, "my developer buddy got a proposal from a big engineering firm, and he sees about $5,000 cheaper than your guys' proposal to do the subdivision, do the parcel map." He said, "But something just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem reasonable to me that these guys would be less money than you." He says, "And I read through their scope, and something's fishy." He said, "Would you mind taking a look at it and tell me what you think?" So he said, "Sure." We told him we would do that. So the price that we put together to take this guy all the way through tentative map and then final map was about $25,000, if I remember correctly. He's in a pretty tough jurisdiction, so there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So the attorney sent me the proposal from the big engineering firm, and sure enough, it was $5,000 cheaper. It was $20,000. But here's what they put in the scope. Here's what they said they were going to do. They were basically going to do an aerial topo for $10,000. And then they were going to put together a checklist of the requirements for him if he wanted to do a subdivision. And they were going to charge him $10,000 for that. So that was it. That was everything in the scope. So $20,000 for an aerial topo and for a land development checklist. Give him an idea what the city requirements were. So I called the attorney back and I said, "Hey," I don't think your client's comparing apples to apples probably. I said, "We're taking them all the way through the subdivision process for our price of $25,000. I said, "These guys they're not even doing a tentative map. They're not even getting started." I said, "They're charging him $10,000 for an aerial that we're going to do for $1,500. And I said, the aerial that they're going to give him, he's not going to be able to get through final design with that because they're not going to do ground surveys on any of the hardscape or the utilities. So the attorney said, yeah, I figured there was something a little weird, and he wasn't understanding the comparison he was trying to make. So he said, I'll talk to him. So I think we're going to end up moving forward with this parcel map. But what do we learn from that experience? And this is a well-known engineering company, large engineering company that gave this gentleman this proposal, and it was a civil engineer that signed the proposal. Well, let's talk about a couple of the problems with the proposal that they gave him. I mentioned one. So they're going to do an aerial topo for $10,000, but he won't be able to use it for final design. So if anything, it's only going to be good for some planning. They didn't really tell the client in their proposal why they needed to do the aerial, because all they were doing in the second task was putting together a checklist. And I don't think you need an aerial topo to do that. Now, maybe they were putting together the aerial topo because they planned on doing some other work product at a future point in time, but they certainly didn't explain that in the proposal. So they just had a task for an aerial there, and they didn't explain to the client how they were going to use it. Then they had this land development checklist that they're preparing for $10,000, which I think is a crazy amount of money. I mean, it's 5 days of work for a senior person. And essentially, we'd already given them that checklist as part of our proposal. We didn't charge them anything. It took us a few hours. We put together reviewed the city requirements and put together a rough checklist to give this guy an idea what he needed to do. And when these guys were done, they didn't explain, after they spent $20,000, what this guy was really going to be left with other than a half-page checklist and an aerial topo that he couldn't do anything with. So, there was no technical report that they were preparing. There was no real work product other than this, this half-page, one-page checklist that you could basically download from the city website. So I don't know what happened, but there was definitely an issue there. They weren't going to meet with the city. They weren't going to talk to the planning department. They were going to talk to Public Works. I feel like they were really trying to take advantage of this guy. So what do we learn from that? Well, when you start to look for a consultant on a land development project in California, and you just drop down to that bottom line fee, and you don't consider the scope that your different consultants are giving you, you can really get in trouble. Now, that guy could have hired that big engineering firm and thought he was saving $5,000, and they were just barely getting started. He'd have paid 5 times that. He'd have paid $100,000 to get through a final map. And so the reality is we're going to be a quarter probably of the price, a quarter or a third of the price by the time we're done to get him to the final map. So you got to be careful. Land surveying and land planning, it's not a commodity. It's not like buying a bag of flour. You got to be careful that when you're comparing competing proposals from consultants like that you are making a fair comparison. And you might think you're going to save some money, and you could end up getting burned. So, and I always encourage people, it's like shopping for a surgeon or a doctor, or even a real estate broker or an attorney. It's probably not going to go well for you if you choose on low bid. You really want to find somebody that you trust and has a good reputation. You want to work with them. And I always encourage people, find a good surveyor and then tell them what you're trying to do, and then work with them to develop the scope. If you just go out and tell somebody, I need a survey, and try and get the cheapest price you're going to get, you're going to get burned. But there's a good chance you're going to get burned. And it shouldn't be that way. Land surveyors shouldn't do that. But that's the reality of the world that we live in. Another lesson I think is choose the right size consultant. This gentleman went to a big civil engineering and architectural firm. They do really big projects. Yeah, he had a small project. He was a rookie developer. He's a rookie developer might be the wrong word. He's not a full-time developer. He's just trying to develop this property on the side. He's a small business owner, and these guys have a really expensive rate schedule, and there's a lot of bloat there that I think he didn't need to pay for. So, if you're a small developer, you have a small to medium-sized project, you might consider working with a smaller firm. I think you're going to get more value for your money. Work with somebody you trust. We talked about that. I certainly don't think these guys were providing good value for the money. They didn't even have a clear proposal. So that's an issue. One question you should ask is, what am I going to have when my consultant's finished? If this guy asked that question, what was he going to have by the time he got done spending $20,000? he was going to have an aerial topo. I don't know what they expected him to do with it at that point, and he was going to have a half a page checklist, which he could basically download from the city website or certainly put together with the conversation with the planning department. Now, to be fair, maybe this company was going to do something more for that 20 grand, but it certainly didn't say that in their scope. And so that makes me nervous. So you should ask yourself that question. When I'm done paying my consultant's bill, what am I going to have left? What's the work product? What value is going to be in that work product? And then a final lesson is don't put the last things first. So they're going to charge this guy for an aerial survey. He doesn't even know if he's got a project yet. He needs to figure out what it's going to cost to get through the subdivision and understand if the project's going to pencil. And might be a little premature to get an aerial topo. Now, if he needs to do a tentative map, then it might make sense. But certainly, I'd like to see him spend some money on a boundary survey before, or at least at the same time as an aerial. And the company, of course, the company didn't talk about that because you got a PE putting together the proposal, so he's not thinking like a land planner or a boundary surveyor. So those are some good lessons. If somebody's charging you $10,000 for a half a page checklist that you can download from the city website, planning website, you probably got an issue with your consultant. And so ask the right questions, work with somebody you trust, make sure that you're not being getting taken advantage of by your consultant team, and choose the right size company. If you got a small project, sometimes there's some extra value in working with a small company.